Today's masterclass is all about using a greenhouse or polytunnel to grow food. You'll learn the benefits, options, and considerations for setting up a greenhouse or polytunnel. And that photo there is, of course, of my greenhouse. So, have you ever thought, wouldn't it be nice to grow more food for longer in the season? A greenhouse or polytunnel can do just that. So, it's a valuable asset to have in your food garden for that reason alone, if you have the room. But there are other benefits and a multitude of uses that I'll get into in just a moment. The important thing is not to automatically think that a greenhouse or polytunnel is out of your reach. You can spend as much as you wish or build one on a budget. And smaller ones can fit into smaller spaces too, even a balcony. There are lots of benefits to having a greenhouse or polytunnel. It allows you to start seeds in milder climates. I only start seeds in my greenhouse and never in the house. The advantage is I keep the mess of soil and such outdoors, and I don't need to use grow lights necessarily if we get enough sunny days. It also lets you overwinter tender perennials. I use it for some flowers and containers, but I also put my rosemary plant in the greenhouse over winter, and there are other tender herbs that you could store that won't survive frost. Obviously, you need to have the perennials in containers to do this. You can also get a head start on the growing season by growing greens and other cold-tolerant crops in an unheated greenhouse or polytunnel, either in containers or beds. And you can grow further into the fall and even winter in some growing zones. And then there are heat-loving crops such as tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, melons, and tropical fruit. Especially in climates where your growing season is short, you'll have better success when you have the extra heat and longer growing season that a greenhouse or polytunnel will give you. And if you heat and light your greenhouse all winter, you might also be able to grow tomatoes and other summer crops year round. But before you get too excited about building a greenhouse or polytunnel, check if you're allowed to and what restrictions you might be under. Note that what info I provide here is not legal advice, just recommendations of what you might have to check into. Definitely check first if you need a building permit. Often building permit requirements depend on the size of the structure. Smaller greenhouses or polytunnels may not need a permit. And sometimes it also depends on the permanency of the structure. Structures that have a solid foundation, such as concrete, usually require a permit. Kit greenhouses that could easily be moved to another location or polytunnels may fall under the classification of temporary structures, but be prepared to remove it or move it if neighbors were to complain. Also, if you're going to be installing electrical outlets or running water lines to the greenhouse or polytunnel, you'll likely need appropriate permits and may also require a licensed electrician or plumber to install the systems. Give yourself enough lead time, as getting permits and approvals can take some time. Start the work in winter if you can, so you're ready to build or set up in early spring. If you do need a building permit, you'll likely have to mention where you will build the greenhouse or erect the polytunnel. So definitely something to decide on early in the process. Ideally, you want to find a spot with full sun. However, in summer, your greenhouse or polytunnel may get too hot, so ideally, if it can be shaded by some deciduous trees, that would be ideal. Not too close, otherwise falling branches could damage your structure. The idea with deciduous trees is that they lose leaves in fall, and so your structure will get maximum sun in winter when it most needs it. Since I'm talking about shade, keep in mind that you don't want the greenhouse or polytunnel shading other parts of the garden where you're trying to grow plants. While a greenhouse especially has lots of glass, I do recommend having the north wall, if you're living in the northern hemisphere, solid and insulated. So you may find that the north side of the greenhouse, there will be a lot of shade. Also keep in mind general access to the structure. You want it to be easy for you to access, not only for tending to your plants, but also harvesting. You also want easy access if you're adding electrical or plumbing, or close enough for your garden hose to reach if you're not adding a water connection close to the structure. If you have raised or in-ground beds, You'll also want to make sure you can get your wheelbarrow to it easily to add soil and compost. So let's now look at various types of greenhouses. The traditional shape is the gable roof, similar to how many houses are built. Four walls and a peaked roof, and this is what is most common in kit greenhouses, and fairly easy to build if you're building from scratch as well. A-frame greenhouses are also an option, but you lose some space at the very edges of the sloping walls. The next style is a lean-to, similar to what I have. Usually these are attached to another structure, such as your house, but I've also seen them against a freestanding brick wall or a fence, or completely freestanding, which require a full back wall to be built, basically then half of a gable greenhouse. The full back wall is usually the north wall, so that it can be fully insulated and absorb heat during the day from the south. Again, if you're in the northern hemisphere, opposite if you're in the southern hemisphere. The other style is a quonset, similar to what you see for temporary military structures or some large farm buildings. This is more like a polytunnel, but can be built with solid plastic panels such as polycarbonate. And finally, there are also geodesic dome greenhouses, a very unique shape and a bit more difficult to build. And the round shape is a bit more tricky if you're building raised beds to go inside. So the easiest way to build a greenhouse is to just go buy a kit. You can get kits that use aluminum framing with either glass or polycarbonate panels. These can usually be secured to a concrete or timber foundation. There are varying levels of cost and quality. You're limited a bit on sizes, having to go with the sizes that are available. The next step up are wood-framed greenhouse kits, often made from cedar, which are more expensive and slightly more complicated to put together. But these are more sturdy and look more upscale if that's what you're after. Often they come with optional upgrades such as vents, benches, and other useful features. Or you can build one yourself like I did. To save costs, you can use discarded windows. The advantage to building your own is that you can build it as big as you need or an odd size and customize it in other ways to your needs and wants. If you're building your own, I recommend using knee walls at the bottom of the walls. These are solid insulated walls that help keep the heat in and the cold out. It reduces the glass or polycarbonate glazing to just where it's needed. And in the northern hemisphere, having a solid, well-insulated north wall is best for heat retention, since you won't get any sunshine from the north side anyways. And the sun shining in from the south will heat up the wall, which will radiate heat back at night, especially if you build a wall out of concrete blocks or bricks. Polytunnels, by their nature, are considered to be more of a temporary greenhouse, something you can put up when you need it and remove it when you don't. But most polytunnels do stay up all year. Commercial ones are usually wider than they are tall, as they tend to be quite large. Smaller ones, typically used in an urban backyard, are usually as wide as they are tall, simply because of space constrictions. These are better as they can handle snow loads well, since there isn't as much horizontal surface area. Row covers and low tunnels are just mini versions of polytunnels and are usually used on individual raised beds, often to reduce pest damage, but also to extend the growing season. You can't walk into them, so they need to be raised to do any weeding, watering, or harvesting. You'll also see partial polytunnels that have sides open. Often these are fully enclosed tunnels in winter, and then the sides are rolled up or removed in summer. These can help plants avoid getting watered from above during rain showers, and that can be a big factor in keeping blight off of plants, such as tomatoes, and mildew off of squash plants and other plants with large leaves. Netting can be used on the open sides to keep out pests. And one more type is a car shelter that is more of a style of a gable roofed greenhouse. Instead of the solid cover it comes with, you replace it with greenhouse plastic. So you have the option of simply buying a polytunnel kit that contains all the support pipes, hardware, and greenhouse plastic. This is the easiest way, but can be quite expensive for larger polytunnels. And the cheaper kits usually have lower quality plastic that might not survive 1 year. But the good news is that polytunnels are easy to construct from standard hardware you can buy at the big box store. Often PVC irrigation pipe is used as it's easy to work with. It bends easily into the hoops needed, cuts easily, and there are many different fittings available. You can also make clips for the plastic cover from larger PVC pipe that then secures the plastic you use on the outside. A stronger alternative is galvanized pipe, usually electric conduit that's used to protect electrical cables. It's more expensive and harder to bend than PVC pipe, requiring a special bending tool. Like PVC pipe, though, there are lots of fittings available to connect pipes together. Having a ridge pipe that runs the length of the polytunnel is usually required to connect all the hoops together. And anchor the pipes well into the ground, even going so far as to cement them in like fence posts. And the final step will be to add the clear plastic covering. You can use regular 6 mil plastic used for vapor barrier and in-house wall construction, but this often won't let enough light in and will break down in the sun from UV rays. Instead, invest in greenhouse plastic that is clearer and is UV stabilized. You'll find it lasts quite a few years in comparison to regular plastic, which makes up for the higher cost. You can just build a greenhouse or polytunnel as an unheated structure. There are lots of passive building techniques to keep the greenhouse warm even in cold temperatures, but it will depend on how much sun you get, as the main source of heat then will be passive solar. If you go this route, you can add water barrels filled with water inside your greenhouse or polytunnel. These will heat up during the day from solar gain and then release their heat at night. Another way is with a closed loop heat recovery system. It involves burying large diameter pipes below the structure and then circulating air through. The idea is that hot air during the day is stored in the underground pipes and then released at night. You can also use the heat given off by fresh manure or compost that is still actively decomposing to heat your greenhouse. Some growers simply add it as a layer on top of beds, give it some time to break down, and then plant into it. Or you can make a hotbed that you then put containers or seed flats on top of. Charles Dowding in the UK does this in his greenhouse, having a 3 by 3 by 3 hotbed, where he starts his heat-loving seeds on. However, you do have to put up with the smell. But if you do need even more supplemental heat, especially if your winters are cold or you don't get much solar gain in winter, you have to consider more active systems, which usually means some kind of heater. If you already have electrical service in your greenhouse, you can use an oil-filled electric heater. These are generally more efficient than a radiant heater. The other option is to install a propane or natural gas heater or a wood stove in your greenhouse. It requires proper installation with enough space around it to avoid starting fires. And it requires proper venting to the outside to ensure that you don't get a buildup of carbon monoxide in your greenhouse. While some plants do fine with cool temperatures, most plants struggle if they don't get enough light. This is especially true in the higher latitudes where daylight hours are limited in winter and even into the early spring or late fall when you still might want to grow something. So, supplemental lighting can help in these situations. You have the option to light the whole greenhouse, especially if you're growing a lot. Or if you're mainly starting seedlings, you can just have some grow lights over your seeding flats. That will be less expensive and you won't light up the whole yard and possibly annoy your neighbors with the light pollution. Advances in lighting make LED lighting almost a no-brainer. It saves costs, you can get a variety of different types of lighting, and it lasts a long time in comparison to fluorescent and incandescent lighting. And if you don't have power in your greenhouse or polytunnel, low voltage LED lighting can even be powered from a 12-volt storage battery that is charged up during the day by a solar panel. Usual recommendation is to keep lighting on for about 12 to 18 hours. This is easiest to automate with a timer. Ventilation is definitely something you want to prioritize and make sure you have enough in your greenhouse or polytunnel. You want to vent heat and moisture. Your structure can easily heat up to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees centigrade on a sunny summer day. That could kill your plants within a day, especially if they haven't been watered enough. High heat can also cause issues with pollination of some fruit and veggie plants, where pollen becomes sterile, meaning that the blossoms won't develop into fruit. You also want to vent excess moisture. A closed greenhouse or polytunnel is like a terrarium where moisture can't escape easily. Too much moisture can cause mildew or mold issues on your plants, but it can also cause damage to the structure itself, especially if it's built of lumber. In both cases, having enough venting is important, either manual or automatic. For a greenhouse, having side windows and then vents in the roof will cause a natural convection current, pulling in cool air from the ground and having the cool air push the hot air out of the roof area where it will collect. Use automatic vents where possible so you avoid the work of opening in the morning and closing at night. Plus, ask any greenhouse owner if they ever forgot to open or close. They probably have, even if they don't want to admit it. In polytunnels, usually just opening the ends and letting a cool breeze through can help. Some polytunnels also have roof vents, and as mentioned when talking about the types of polytunnels, you can also roll up or remove the sides for a partial polytunnel in the hot months of summer. The other option is to install fans for ventilation. These may of course require electrical service to your structure, or like I did, I hooked up some discarded computer fans to a solar panel for ventilation in my greenhouse. Finally, you can also keep the sun from entering your structure. You can get shade cloth, which reduces the amount of sun entering. It will of course reduce light levels, but in summer that shouldn't be an issue. You can get various light blocking levels based on how hot the sun is and what you want to grow within your structure. So, saying all this about ventilation, how will you know if your greenhouse or polytunnel is okay or if you need more or less ventilation? Ideally, you want some way to track temperature, humidity, and light levels. You could simply put a thermometer, hydrometer, or light meter in your greenhouse and check it a few times a day. But if you work outside the home or in general are very busy, that's not going to work. So the best solution is a suite of sensors that monitor these types of conditions and then send the info to a central station in the greenhouse or even better, your house. Often the central station will record the info and at least give you the highs and lows as my temperature monitoring station you see in the photo does. In case you're wondering, the top number is my greenhouse temperature and the bottom one is my home's temperature on a warm, sunny spring day. And these are temperatures in Celsius. And now with almost everyone having a smartphone or tablet, you can also have your sensors send data to the cloud, and then you can download an app that can then access that data. You can even monitor your greenhouse when you're on vacation or at work. Now that you have set up your greenhouse or polytunnel, it's time to get growing. You have the same options you have for outdoor growing for the most part. You can grow in raised beds, in-ground beds, or of course containers and planters. Usually in polytunnels, you'll grow in in-ground beds. Greenhouses are more suited to containers or maybe a raised bed or two. The other growing space you'll likely want to have is some kind of growing bench for starting seeds. You could do this on the ground, but having your seeds at standing height for you makes it easier to water. Keep in mind if you have plants you're overwintering, that those are best in containers that you can easily move in and out. Be sure to harden off plants before you move them outdoors, as they've been used to the comfortable environment of the greenhouse or polytunnel. I have to mention it again, remember to ventilate. I already mentioned shade cloth, but for a greenhouse you can also thinly whitewash the roof panels with a white latex paint to cut down on solar heat gain during the hottest, sunniest months. It will eventually wear off from rain and fall so that you can get then maximum light gain in wintertime, or it can be easily removed. Be sure to water regularly. Containers will benefit from having a deep tray underneath that you can keep filled with water to bottom water. Although, let it dry out, especially if you get some cooler weather, so your plant's roots are not constantly wet all the time. Avoid working in the greenhouse on a very hot summer day. Trust me, sometimes I didn't have a choice, and unless you don't mind the heat, then it's fine. But the usual precautions of drinking enough fluids and avoiding heat strokes still apply. I usually try and do any greenhouse tasks in the morning as my greenhouse doesn't get full sun on it until the afternoon. But as soon as noon hits in summer, I'm out of there. Greenhouses and polytunnels do require some maintenance, and that's why some food growers shy away from them. But it's not so bad if you can keep up with it. Fix any leaks as soon as you notice them. Not only will it let cold air in and lose heat in wintertime, but it also will allow rain in, which can result in moisture issues. Greenhouses can be caulked with a waterproof caulking, and tears in polytunnel plastic can be repaired with a special greenhouse tape that is UV resistant. Keep windows and coverings clean, both from the inside and the outside. Usually good to clean in spring before you start seeds, and again in fall before winter, so you can maximize solar gain. Use mild cleaners such as environmentally friendly dish soap or vinegar mixed in water. Also, regularly clean out the structure, getting rid of accumulated plant debris, spilled soil, and leaves that might blow in. This reduces the chance of getting diseases, especially mold and mildew, and it makes for a nicer place to work in too. Check your heaters, fans, and vents to make sure they're operating properly. If you're using sensors, be sure to replace batteries and clean them so they continue to work well.